Alina Petrov stood behind the gleaming marble counter of the Grand Sterling Hotel, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she arranged champagne flutes on a silver tray. The crystal caught the light from the enormous chandelier above, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the polished surface. She had been working at the hotel for nearly 2 years now, ever since she had arrived in the city with nothing but a worn suitcase and dreams that felt heavier than the luggage she carried. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover her small studio apartment on the edge of town and left her with just enough to send a little money back home to her younger sister who was still in school. Tonight was different from the usual evening shifts. The hotel was hosting one of the most exclusive charity galas of the season, an event that attracted the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. Alina had volunteered to work the party because the overtime pay was too good to pass up, and she needed every extra dollar she could get. Her sister's tuition was due next month, and the bills seemed to multiply faster than she could count them. As she adjusted her crisp white shirt and smoothed down her black vest, she caught a glimpse of herself in one of the ornate mirrors that lined the hallway. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and though fatigue shadowed her eyes, she held her head high with a dignity that no amount of hardship could take away. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Enormous floral arrangements in shades of cream and gold adorned every table, and the scent of roses and lilies filled the air. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music creating an elegant backdrop to the sound of clinking glasses and refined conversation. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in designer gowns glided across the floor, their laughter light and careless in a way that spoke of lives untouched by real worry. Alina moved among them like a ghost, invisible, except when someone needed their glass refilled or a canapé delivered. She had learned long ago how to make herself unobtrusive, how to blend into the background while still being attentive to every need. As the evening progressed, Alina found herself serving a table near the center of the room where a group of particularly wealthy guests had gathered. At the head of the table sat Marcus Ashford, a real estate mogul whose face appeared regularly in the business sections of newspapers and on the screens of financial news programs. He was a man in his early 50s with silver hair slicked back from his forehead and a smile that never quite reached his cold gray eyes. His suit probably cost more than Alina made in 6 months, and he wore his wealth like armor, using it to command attention and respect from everyone around him. His companions hung on his every word, laughing too loudly at his jokes and nodding eagerly at his pronouncements about the economy and politics. Alina had served his table several times throughout the evening, and each time she approached, she felt the weight of his gaze on her. It wasn't the kind of attention that made her feel seen as a person, but rather the way someone might look at an object they were considering purchasing or discarding. When she came to refill his wine glass for the 3rd time, he finally spoke to her directly. His voice was smooth and cultured, but there was an edge to it that made her instinctively wary. "Tell me, young lady," Marcus said, gesturing toward her with his glass in a way that made the ruby liquid swirl dangerously close to the rim. "What does someone like you do when you're not serving drinks to people like us? Do you have any talents beyond carrying trays?" The conversation at the table stopped abruptly, and all eyes turned toward Alina. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral and professional. Years of working in service had taught her how to handle difficult customers, though something about Marcus Ashford's tone suggested this wasn't just idle curiosity. "I do my job to the best of my ability, sir," she replied quietly, her accent carrying the soft traces of her Eastern European heritage. "And I'm grateful for the opportunity to work here." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth that his companions seemed to recognize as the precursor to entertainment at someone else's expense. "How diplomatic," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "But surely you must have dreams, aspirations. Or are you content to spend your life bringing champagne to your betters?" Alina felt something twist in her chest at his words, but she kept her face carefully blank. She needed this job too much to risk saying what she really thought. "Everyone has dreams, sir," she said simply, hoping he would lose interest and let her return to her work. But Marcus was clearly enjoying himself now. He turned to his companions with a theatrical gesture. "You see, this is what I was talking about earlier. These people come to our country, take our jobs, and yet they have no real ambition, no drive to better themselves. They're content to remain in service positions, never striving for anything greater." His words were met with uncomfortable shifting from some of his guests, though others nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the same casual superiority that radiated from their host. Alina's hands tightened imperceptibly around the wine bottle she held, but she said nothing. She had encountered this kind of prejudice before, though rarely delivered with such casual cruelty in such a public setting. She was about to excuse herself when Marcus suddenly stood up, his eyes lighting up with what appeared to be a brilliant idea. "Wait," he said, his voice rising enough to catch the attention of nearby tables. "I've just remembered something. This hotel has that beautiful grand piano in the corner, doesn't it? The one they use for special performances." The hotel manager, who had been hovering nearby to ensure the important guests were well cared for, stepped forward nervously. "Yes, Mr. Ashford, it's a Steinway, actually. We had a pianist scheduled for earlier in the evening, but they've already finished their set." Marcus's smile widened, and Alina felt a cold sense of dread settle in her stomach. "Perfect," he said, turning back to her with an expression that was all sharp edges beneath the veneer of politeness. "You mentioned that everyone has dreams. I'm willing to bet that someone like you probably took a few piano lessons at some point, thinking you might become the next great concert pianist. Am I right?" Alina's breath caught in her throat. She had indeed studied piano, but that was a part of her life she kept private, a sacred memory that belonged to a different time and a different version of herself. "I have some experience with the instrument," she admitted carefully, unsure where this was leading but certain it was nowhere good. "Excellent." Marcus clapped his hands together and the sound seemed to echo through the ballroom. "Then I have a proposition for you. Play something for us on that piano, entertain my guests. If you can actually play well, I'll give you $1,000 as a tip. Think of it as an opportunity to prove that you're more than just a waitress." His words were framed as generosity, but his tone and the glint in his eyes told a different story. This wasn't an offer. It was a setup, a chance to humiliate her in front of everyone. The ballroom had grown quieter now, with more people turning their attention to the unfolding scene. Alina could feel dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some pitying, and others anticipatory, as if waiting for a show. Her mind raced through her options. She could refuse, but that might cost her this job, and she couldn't afford to lose it. She could try to deflect, but Marcus seemed determined to see this through. Or she could accept, knowing that he expected her to fail, to fumble through some simple melody that would prove his point about her limitations and justify his contempt. "I don't think that's necessary, sir," the hotel manager interjected nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. "Miss Petrov is here to work, not to perform." But Marcus waved him off dismissively. "Nonsense. I'm sure she'd appreciate the chance to earn some extra money. $1,000 is nothing to sneeze at for someone in her position." He looked at Alina expectantly, his smile never wavering, daring her to refuse. Alina set down the wine bottle on a nearby service table, her hands surprisingly steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. She thought of her sister, of the tuition payment that was due, of all the times she had swallowed her pride to keep moving forward. But more than that, she thought of her father, who had been a music teacher before illness took him too soon, and her mother, who had sacrificed everything to ensure that Alina and her sister had the education they deserved. She thought of the countless hours she had spent at the piano as a child, her fingers flying over the keys while her father nodded approvingly from his chair by the window. "I'll play," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed ballroom. She met Marcus's eyes directly, refusing to look away. "But not for the money. I'll play because music shouldn't be used as a tool for mockery, and because everyone deserves the chance to share their gifts, regardless of what job they hold or where they come from." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Alina saw Marcus's smile falter for just a moment before it returned, harder than before. "How noble," he said sarcastically. "Well then, by all means, enlighten us with your gifts." Alina walked toward the grand piano that sat on a raised platform at the far end of the ballroom. Each step felt both too long and too short, as if time itself had become elastic. The crowd parted to let her through, and she was aware of whispered conversations following in her wake. Some people looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few wore the same cruel anticipation as Marcus, eager to witness her humiliation. The piano was a magnificent instrument, its black lacquer finish reflecting the chandelier light like still water. She had passed it countless times during her shifts, always resisting the urge to run her fingers over the keys, to reconnect with the part of herself she had locked away when survival became more important than dreams. She sat down on the bench, adjusting her position with the automatic precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before. The ballroom had fallen completely silent now, the only sound the faint rustle of expensive fabrics as people shifted to get a better view. Alina placed her hands over the keys, feeling the cool smoothness of the ivory beneath her fingertips. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting herself remember. She remembered her father's hands guiding hers through difficult passages, her mother's voice calling her to dinner while she insisted on finishing just one more piece, the pride in her teachers' faces when she performed at recitals back home. She had been good once, more than good. She had been exceptional, a prodigy that her small town had celebrated. She had won competitions and earned a scholarship to a prestigious music conservatory, a future bright with possibilities stretching out before her. But then her father had gotten sick, and the medical bills had consumed everything. Her mother had worked 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough, and Alina had made the choice to leave, to come to this country where she could earn more money to send back home. The conservatory, the career, the music itself had all been sacrificed on the altar of family obligation, and she had made peace with that choice even as it broke something inside her. But the music had never truly left her. It lived in her fingers, in the muscle memory that 2 years of waitressing hadn't erased. It lived in her heart, in the melodies that played in her mind during long shifts and lonely nights. And now, with all these people watching, expecting her to fail, she felt something ignite inside her that had been dormant for too long. She would play not to prove Marcus wrong or to earn his money, but to remind herself of who she had been and who she still was beneath the uniform and the exhaustion. Alina opened her eyes and began to play. The first notes that flowed from the piano were soft and tentative, like the opening of a conversation between old friends who haven't seen each other in years. Alina had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had always spoken to her soul with its combination of melancholy and hope. Her fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that belied the complexity of what she was playing, each note precise and clear. The opening melody was deceptively simple, a tender exploration of the theme that would soon blossom into something far more profound. As she played, something remarkable happened. The cynical smirk that had been plastered across Marcus Ashford's face began to fade, replaced first by surprise and then by something that looked almost like confusion. He had expected her to stumble through a basic tune, maybe a simple folk song or a children's piece that would confirm his assumptions about her limitations. Instead, what he was hearing was the work of someone who had not just learned to play the piano but had devoted years to mastering it. The other guests at his table had stopped their whispering, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips as they listened. Alina was no longer aware of them. The moment her fingers touched the keys, she had been transported to another place in time. She was back in the small music room of her childhood home, with its yellowed wallpaper and the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. She could almost smell the tea her mother would bring her during practice sessions, could almost hear her father's gentle corrections and encouragement. The pain of missing them, of being so far from home and the life she had once known, poured into her playing. Every note carried the weight of sacrifice, every phrase spoke of dreams deferred but not forgotten. The nocturne moved into its more complex middle section, where Chopin's genius truly revealed itself. The melody became more ornate, the left hand providing a steady, rolling accompaniment while the right hand soared above it with elaborate flourishes and delicate trills. Alina's fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed and accuracy, her years of training evident in every movement. She navigated the difficult passages with an ease that made them seem effortless, though anyone with musical knowledge would recognize the tremendous skill required to play them so cleanly. The crowd in the ballroom had grown completely still. Conversations had died mid-sentence, and even the wait staff had stopped moving, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. This was not background music to be ignored while people chatted about business deals and social gossip. This was a performance that demanded attention, that reached into the chest and grabbed hold of something fundamental and human. Several of the older guests had tears forming in their eyes, moved by the emotional depth Alina brought to the piece. Marcus Ashford sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. He had orchestrated this moment as entertainment, a chance to put an uppity waitress in her place and reinforce the natural order of things as he saw it. Instead, he was being forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that talent and worth had nothing to do with job titles or social status. The young woman he had dismissed as unremarkable, as someone beneath his notice except as a target for casual cruelty, was revealing herself to be extraordinary. And with each perfectly executed phrase, each moment of genuine artistry, his earlier words were being exposed as the ignorant prejudice they truly were. Alina continued to play, building toward the piece's emotional climax. Her whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly as she poured everything she had into the performance. The notes seemed to cascade from the piano like water from a fountain, clear and pure and seemingly endless. She had practiced this nocturne thousands of times over the years, had performed it at her final recital before leaving for America, and it had become a part of her in a way that transcended mere memorization. She wasn't reading music or following a formula. She was speaking in the language that had been her first love, expressing things that words could never capture. As the piece moved into its final section, Alina allowed herself to glance briefly at the audience. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. The entire ballroom was focused on her, hundreds of faces wearing expressions of wonder and astonishment. Some people had moved closer to the piano, drawn by the music like moths to a flame. Others stood with their hands clasped over their hearts, visibly moved. Even the members of the string quartet who had performed earlier were watching with professional appreciation, nodding to each other in recognition of exceptional skill. But it was the faces of the hotel staff that affected Alina most deeply. Her fellow waiters and waitresses had gathered at the edges of the room, their usual masks of professional neutrality replaced by expressions of pride and joy. These were people who knew her, who had worked alongside her during countless shifts, sharing the small indignities and frustrations of service work. They had heard her humming sometimes during quiet moments in the kitchen, had seen her fingers occasionally moving as if playing invisible keys during her breaks. But none of them had known the full extent of what she was capable of, and now they stood witness to her revelation with tears streaming down their faces. Maria, the older woman who worked the breakfast shift and had taken Alina under her wing when she first started at the hotel, was openly weeping. She had always told Alina that she could tell there was something special about her, something that transcended the circumstances that had brought her to this job. Now that intuition was being confirmed in the most spectacular way possible. The hotel manager, who had tried to intervene on Alina's behalf earlier, stood with his mouth slightly open, clearly stunned. He had hired her based on her work ethic and reliability, never imagining that he had a world-class musician serving drinks in his establishment. Alina brought the nocturne to its gentle conclusion, the final notes hanging in the air like the last stars fading at dawn. The melody resolved itself with a quiet dignity, neither triumphant nor defeated, but simply complete. Her hands lifted from the keys and settled in her lap, and for a moment there was absolute silence in the ballroom. It was the kind of silence that follows something sacred, when applause seems almost inappropriate because it would break the spell of what has just been experienced. Then someone started to clap, a single pair of hands breaking the stillness. Others joined in immediately, and within seconds the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet in a standing ovation, their hands coming together in appreciation of what they had just witnessed. The sound was deafening, washing over Alina in waves that made her feel dizzy and unreal. She had performed for crowds before, had received acclaim and recognition back when music was her life. But this felt different. These people had expected nothing from her, had been prepared to dismiss her as unworthy of their notice, and now they were celebrating her talent with genuine enthusiasm. Alina stood slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. She had poured so much emotion into the performance that she felt drained, as if she had run a marathon. She turned to face the audience and gave a small, dignified bow, the way her teachers had taught her years ago. The applause continued, growing even louder when some people began to whistle and cheer. Several guests were calling out words of praise and amazement, their voices barely audible over the general roar of approval. Through the crowd, Alina could see Marcus Ashford still seated at his table, his face now an alarming shade of red. He was not applauding. His hands remained flat on the table in front of him, his knuckles white from the pressure he was exerting. The people around him were on their feet, clapping enthusiastically, but he sat like a stone, fury radiating from every line of his body. He had been made to look foolish in front of his peers, had been proven spectacularly wrong in his assumptions, and for a man like him, there was no greater humiliation. As the applause finally began to die down and people returned to their seats, a new energy filled the ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted fundamentally. What had been a typical high society charity gala, pleasant but ultimately forgettable, had become something memorable, a story that these guests would tell for years to come. Alina stood beside the piano, uncertain of what to do next. She had fulfilled Marcus's challenge, had played as he demanded, but now she found herself stranded in the spotlight with no clear path forward. A woman in an elegant silver gown approached the piano platform, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor. She was perhaps 60 years old, with white hair styled in a sophisticated chignon and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. Alina recognized her as Catherine Winters, one of the city's most prominent philanthropists and arts patrons. Her name appeared on concert halls and museums throughout the city, and her support could make or break artistic careers. "My dear," Catherine said, her voice rich with genuine emotion, "that was absolutely extraordinary. I have attended concerts at the finest venues in the world, and I can honestly say that I have rarely been so moved. Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" Before Alina could answer, other guests began to gather around, all wanting to express their appreciation and ask questions. A distinguished-looking man with a thick German accent introduced himself as Friedrich Hoffmann, the director of the city's symphony orchestra. A younger woman revealed herself to be a music journalist for a major newspaper. They crowded around Alina, their earlier indifference replaced by eager interest, and she felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "I studied at the National Conservatory in my home country," Alina managed to say, her voice still shaky from the emotional intensity of the performance. "My father was my first teacher, and later I worked with Professor Dmitry Volkov. I had planned to continue my studies, but circumstances changed." Catherine Winters nodded understandingly, her sharp eyes taking in Alina's waitress uniform and the fatigue that lined her young face. "Life often interferes with our plans," she said gently. "But talent like yours is too precious to waste serving champagne, my dear, no offense to the noble profession of hospitality. Tell me, do you still practice? Do you have access to a piano?" Alina shook her head, feeling a familiar ache in her chest. "No, ma'am, I haven't played seriously in over 2 years. I don't have a piano where I live and I work most days. There hasn't been time or opportunity." She didn't mention that even if she had the time, she couldn't afford to rent practice space, or that she had walked past music stores countless times, pressing her face to the windows to look at the instruments inside, before forcing herself to move on. Friedrich Hoffmann frowned deeply, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "This is unacceptable," he declared in his heavily accented English. "A musician of your caliber should be performing, should be sharing your gift with the world. What you played tonight, after 2 years away from the instrument, many professional pianists could not achieve with daily practice. You have something special, young lady, something that cannot be taught. It can only be nurtured." The hotel manager, emboldened by the positive attention Alina was receiving, stepped forward with an apologetic expression. "Miss Petrov, I had no idea you possessed such extraordinary talent. If I had known, I would have arranged for you to have access to our piano during your off hours. Please, consider it available to you whenever the ballroom isn't in use. It seems criminal that such a magnificent instrument sits silent most of the time when you could be practicing." Alina felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness and recognition these strangers were showing her. For 2 years, she had been invisible, just another face in the army of service workers that kept the city running. And now, because of a few minutes at a piano, she was being seen as a person with value beyond her ability to carry trays efficiently. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you all so much." But not everyone in the ballroom was pleased with this turn of events. Marcus Ashford had finally risen from his seat, his face still flushed with anger and embarrassment. He pushed through the crowd surrounding Alina with barely concealed aggression, using his bulk and social status to clear a path. When he reached the piano, he fixed Alina with a look of pure contempt. "Well," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the warm conversation like a blade. "That was quite the performance. I suppose we've all learned something tonight." His words dripped with sarcasm, and the ugly undertone was unmistakable. He was not conceding defeat graciously, but rather preparing for a counterattack. Catherine Winters turned to him with a cool expression, her earlier warmth replaced by aristocratic frost. "Yes, Marcus, we certainly have learned something. We've learned that extraordinary talent can be found in unexpected places, and that making assumptions about people based on their current circumstances is both foolish and cruel." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I was merely trying to give the girl an opportunity," he said defensively. "I offered her money to play, didn't I? $1,000, which is more than generous for a few minutes of entertainment." "You offered her money as part of a scheme to humiliate her," Catherine said sharply, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had navigated high society for decades and could read ulterior motives like other people read newspapers. "We all saw what you were doing, Marcus. You wanted to make her look foolish, to prove some petty point about worth and station. Instead, she has proven that character and talent have nothing to do with the size of one's bank account." Several people in the crowd murmured their agreement, and Alina saw Marcus's face grow even redder. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not in public by someone who matched his social status. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, Alina thought he might actually lose control completely. "I don't need lectures from you, Catherine," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "This is my event, my party, and I invited this waitress to play. If she's so talented, why is she serving drinks instead of playing concert halls? I'll tell you why, because talent alone means nothing without connections, without the right background, without belonging to the right circles. She can play pretty notes all she wants, but at the end of the night she'll still be clearing glasses while we write the checks." The cruelty in his words created a shocked silence. Even those who might have privately agreed with his sentiment about class and status were appalled by the baldness of his expression. This was the kind of thing that was sometimes thought but never said aloud, especially not in front of the person being discussed. Alina felt as if she had been slapped, the joy of her performance draining away in the face of his vicious assessment. But before she could respond, Friedrich Hoffmann stepped between them, his compact frame somehow seeming imposing despite being several inches shorter than Marcus. You are wrong, the conductor said with quiet intensity. Talent means everything, and this young woman has more of it in her little finger than most of the wealthy dilettantes who buy their way onto concert stages. As for connections and the right circles, I am offering those to her right now. He turned to Alina, his stern expression softening. Miss Petrov, I would like to offer you an audition with the City Symphony Orchestra. We have a piano soloist position opening up next season, and I believe you would be an excellent candidate. Additionally, I know several people who provide scholarships for advanced musical study. With your permission, I would like to put you in contact with them. Alina stared at Friedrich Hoffmann in disbelief, certain she must have misheard him. The City Symphony Orchestra was one of the most prestigious musical institutions in the country, and the opportunity to audition for them was something she had never even allowed herself to dream about. I don't understand, she said slowly. You've only heard me play one piece, and it's been so long since I practiced regularly. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that. Let me be the judge of what you're ready for, Friedrich said with a slight smile. I have been conducting orchestras for 40 years, and I can tell within 30 seconds whether someone has true talent or is simply technically proficient. You, my dear, have something that cannot be taught in any conservatory. You have soul, passion, and a depth of musical understanding that takes most people a lifetime to develop, if they ever develop it at all. Yes, you will need to practice to rebuild some of the technique that may have gotten rusty, but the foundation is there, solid and unshakable. Catherine Winters nodded enthusiastically. I agree completely, and I want to help make this happen. Miss Petrov, the Winters Foundation provides grants for artists who show exceptional promise but lack the financial means to pursue their careers. I would like to sponsor you personally. This would include access to practice facilities, private lessons with some of the best teachers in the city, and a living stipend so you don't have to work full-time while you prepare for your audition. Alina felt dizzy, as if the floor beneath her feet had become unstable. These opportunities were beyond anything she could have imagined when she woke up that morning and put on her waitress uniform. I don't know what to say, she whispered. This is so much more than I ever expected, but I have responsibilities. My sister is in school back home and my mother depends on the money I send. I can't just stop working. The stipend would be sufficient to cover your living expenses and still allow you to send money to your family, Catherine assured her. I've been doing this for a long time, dear. I know how to structure these grants so that talented young people don't have to choose between their art and their obligations. Consider it an investment in your future, one that I am confident will pay dividends for the entire cultural community. Marcus Ashford had been listening to this exchange with growing fury, his face now almost purple with rage. This is ridiculous, he burst out. You're all making fools of yourselves over a waitress who played one piece well. For all we know, that's the only thing she can play. Maybe she's been practicing that one nocturne for months, hoping for a chance to show off. This is nothing but a manipulation, a sob story designed to extract money and opportunities from soft-hearted bleeding hearts. The music journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Chen, turned to Marcus with barely concealed disgust. If that's what you think, Mr. Ashford, why don't we test your theory? Miss Petrov, would you be willing to play something else? Perhaps something you choose on the spot, something that would prove this wasn't a rehearsed performance. Alina took a deep breath, her initial shock giving way to a quiet anger. She had endured Marcus's condescension and cruelty with professional grace, had maintained her dignity in the face of his attempts to humiliate her. But his continued attacks, even after she had proven herself, revealed a pettiness and insecurity that deserved to be answered. Yes, she said clearly, I'll play something else. What would you like to hear, Mr. Ashford? Marcus seemed taken aback by the direct challenge, clearly not having expected her to agree so readily. He fumbled for a moment, then said with false confidence, play something by Rachmaninoff. His Piano Concerto No. 2, the first movement. If you're as good as these people seem to think, that should be easy for you. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto was notoriously difficult, one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire. The first movement alone required tremendous technical skill, exceptional hand span to reach the wide chord progressions, and the stamina to maintain intensity throughout its lengthy duration. It was a piece that professional pianists spent months preparing for performances, and Marcus was asking Alina to play it cold, without warm-up or practice, and without the orchestra that was meant to accompany it. Friedrich Hoffmann shook his head in disbelief. This is unfair, Marcus. No one could be expected to play that piece without preparation, especially not the solo piano version, which requires managing both the piano part and approximating the orchestral elements. You're setting her up to fail. But Alina had already returned to the piano bench, her jaw set with determination. She had played Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto before, had in fact performed it with the Conservatory Orchestra at a regional competition 3 years ago. It had been one of the proudest moments of her life, and her father had been there to see it, already weakened by illness but insisting on attending despite her mother's protests. The memory of his face during that performance, glowing with pride and joy, had sustained her through many dark moments since. "It's all right," she said, flexing her fingers and rolling her shoulders to loosen the tension. "I know this piece. I know it well." She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes, reaching back through time to find the connection she had once had with this music. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto was a work of sweeping romanticism, full of passion and longing and the kind of emotional intensity that could overwhelm if the performer wasn't careful. The opening chord sequence was famous, a series of powerful strikes that announced the piece like thunder before a storm. Alina began to play, and the difference between this and the gentle Chopin nocturne was immediately apparent. Where the Chopin had been intimate and contemplative, the Rachmaninoff was bold and demanding. Her hands moved across the keyboard with fierce precision, attacking the chords with a force that made the piano ring out through the ballroom. The opening sequence was meant to be played with full orchestra, the piano and strings building together toward the entrance of the main theme. But Alina managed to suggest the orchestral parts through careful use of dynamics and timing, creating the impression of a conversation between multiple instruments even though she was playing alone. The technical demands of the piece were immense. Rachmaninoff had been a pianist himself, and he had written music that fully exploited the capabilities of both the instrument and the performer. There were rapid scale passages that required her fingers to fly across multiple octaves, thick chord progressions that demanded strength and accuracy, and delicate melodic lines that needed to sing out above the complex harmonies. Alina navigated all of it with a confidence that belied her 2-year absence from serious playing. But what was even more remarkable than her technical proficiency was the emotional depth she brought to the interpretation. This was not just a display of skill, it was a genuine artistic statement. She understood the architecture of the piece, knew when to push forward with urgency and when to pull back for moments of reflection. The famous love theme, when it emerged from the turbulent opening, was played with such tenderness and longing that several people in the audience gasped audibly. Marcus Ashford's expression had changed from smug satisfaction to something approaching horror. He had chosen this piece specifically because he believed it would be impossible for her to play well without extensive preparation. Instead, she was delivering a performance that would have been impressive in a concert hall with months of practice behind it. Every note she played was another nail in the coffin of his prejudices, another piece of evidence that his worldview was built on sand. Alina could feel the music taking over, pushing aside everything else. The ballroom, the audience, the circumstances that had led to this moment, all of it faded away until there was only the piano and the music. Her body moved with the phrases, leaning into the powerful moments and drawing back during the quieter passages. Sweat beaded on her forehead from the physical exertion required, but her focus never wavered. The first movement of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto builds to a tremendous climax, a moment where everything that has come before seems to crystallize into pure emotional power. Alina drove toward that climax with unwavering intensity, her fingers dancing across the keys in passages that would have challenged even experienced professionals. And when she reached the final sequence, the great sweeping chords that bring the movement to its conclusion, she played them with such conviction and strength that it felt as if the entire ballroom was vibrating with the force of the music. The last chord rang out and then faded into silence. Alina sat at the piano, her chest heaving from the exertion, her hands still raised above the keys. For several seconds, no one in the ballroom moved or spoke. They seemed frozen in place, trying to process what they had just witnessed. This was no longer simply impressive. This was extraordinary, the kind of performance that defined careers and changed lives. The applause that erupted this time was even more thunderous than before, if such a thing was possible. People weren't just clapping, they were shouting, cheering, some even crying openly. Catherine Winters had tears streaming down her face, making no attempt to hide her emotion. Friedrich Hoffmann was nodding vigorously, a broad smile splitting his usually stern features. The other musicians in the room, including the string quartet members, were applauding with a particular enthusiasm, recognizing the exceptional nature of what they had just heard. Rebecca Chen, the music journalist, was frantically typing notes into her phone, her eyes wide with excitement. This was the kind of story that careers were built on, a genuine discovery happening right in front of her eyes. She was already composing the headline in her mind. Undiscovered prodigy found serving champagne at high society gala. Alina stood slowly from the piano bench, her legs trembling not from nervousness this time, but from the sheer physical and emotional expenditure of the performance. She had given everything she had to that piece, had poured years of pent-up longing and frustration and love for music into every note. She felt hollowed out but also strangely liberated, as if she had been carrying a weight she hadn't known was there and had finally set it down. The crowd surged forward again, but this time the hotel manager and several staff members formed a protective barrier around Alina, sensing that she needed a moment to recover. Catherine Winters and Friedrich Hoffmann were allowed through, and the older woman immediately pulled Alina into a warm embrace. "My dear child," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion, "you have just given us all a tremendous gift. That was truly one of the most remarkable performances I have ever witnessed, and I do not say that lightly. Whatever happens next, you must promise me that you will not let this talent go to waste. The world needs beauty like what you create, needs it desperately." Friedrich pulled out a business card and pressed it into Alina's hand. "You must come to my office next week. We will discuss the audition and begin making arrangements for your training. I am already thinking about which pieces would best showcase your abilities. You have the technical skill, yes, but more importantly, you have the musical intelligence and emotional depth that separates good pianists from great ones." Through the crowd, Alina could see Marcus Ashford standing alone at his table, his companions having abandoned him to join the celebration surrounding her. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation, but underneath that, Alina could detect something else. A desperate attempt to salvage his pride and reassert his dominance over a situation that had completely escaped his control. He pushed his way through the crowd once more, his movements aggressive enough that people stumbled aside to avoid him. When he reached Alina, he pulled out his wallet with exaggerated deliberation, making sure everyone could see what he was doing. He counted out a thick stack of $100 bills, far more than the $1,000 he had originally promised. "Here," he said loudly, thrusting the money toward Alina. "I'm a man of my word, you played well, so here's your payment. $2,000 in fact, because I'm feeling generous. Consider it a reward for your little performance." But there was nothing generous in his tone or his expression. This was a power play, a desperate attempt to reframe the situation in a way that preserved his superiority. By paying her as if she were merely an entertainer he had hired, rather than an artist who had shared something profound, he was trying to reduce her triumph to a simple transaction, to put her back in her place as someone who served people like him. Alina looked at the money, then at Marcus's face, and something crystallized inside her. She had spent 2 years accepting whatever scraps of dignity she could hold onto while doing work that was honest but invisible. She had swallowed countless small humiliations because she needed the money and couldn't afford pride. But this moment was different. What had happened tonight had changed something fundamental, and she realized that she no longer had to accept being treated as less than human by men like Marcus Ashford. She straightened her spine and looked him directly in the eyes, refusing to be intimidated by his wealth or his anger. "I don't want your money, Mr. Ashford," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom. "When I agreed to play, I told you it wasn't for money. I played because music matters, because art matters, and because no one should use those things as weapons to hurt other people." Marcus's face flushed even darker and he shook the bills at her impatiently. "Don't be stupid, girl. This is more money than you make in a month. Take it." "No," Alina repeated firmly. She was aware of the entire ballroom watching this confrontation, could feel the weight of their attention, but she didn't waver. "You offered that money as part of a scheme to embarrass me. You wanted me to fail so you could prove whatever point you were trying to make about people you consider beneath you. I won't accept money that comes from cruelty and contempt." Catherine Winters stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Alina's shoulder. "The young woman has made her position clear, Marcus. I suggest you respect it." But Marcus was beyond reason now, his ego too bruised to allow this final humiliation. "You're making a mistake," he hissed at Alina. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I could do for your career or what I could do to destroy it before it even starts? I have connections throughout this city. One phone call from me could ensure that no respectable venue would ever hire you." "Then make your phone calls," Alina said quietly. "I would rather wait tables for the rest of my life with my dignity intact than build a career on the approval of someone like you." The shocked silence that followed her words was broken by a slow clap from the back of the ballroom. An elderly man whom Alina hadn't noticed before was applauding, and as people turned to look, many recognized him as Jonathan Sterling, the retired conductor who had led the city's symphony orchestra for 3 decades before Friedrich Hoffmann took over. He was a legend in the classical music world, and his opinion carried tremendous weight. "Well said, young lady," Jonathan called out as he made his way through the crowd, leaning heavily on a cane but moving with determined purpose. "Marcus, I've known you since you were a boy, and I've watched you become exactly what your father hoped you wouldn't, a bully who mistakes money for merit. This young woman has more character in her little finger than you've shown in your entire life. He reached Alina and studied her with keen, intelligent eyes that were still sharp despite his advanced age. I heard both pieces you played tonight, and I must tell you that you remind me of the great pianists I had the privilege of working with during my career. Argerich, Parahia, Kissen, they all had what you have, that ineffable quality that makes music come alive. Friedrich is right to offer you an audition, but I suspect you won't need it. I predict that within 5 years, orchestras will be competing for the chance to work with you. Alina felt tears finally spill down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the kindness and recognition from these distinguished strangers. For so long she had felt invisible, had wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in sacrificing her musical dreams for her family's needs. And now, in the space of less than an hour, her entire life had been turned upside down. Marcus Ashford stuffed the money back into his wallet with shaking hands, his face now showing not just anger but something close to panic. The united front of respected figures against him, the clear judgment from his peers, had finally penetrated his armor of arrogance. He looked around the ballroom and seemed to realize for the first time just how isolated he had become. People were looking at him with contempt and pity, and the social capital he had spent years building was evaporating before his eyes. "You'll all regret this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Every single one of you will regret taking her side over mine." He turned and strode toward the exit, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His earlier companions made no move to follow him, and several actively turned away as he passed, publicly disassociating themselves from his behavior. As the door closed behind Marcus, the tension in the ballroom seemed to dissipate like smoke. Conversations erupted everywhere, excited chatter about what they had just witnessed. The hotel manager approached Alina with an apologetic expression, clearly worried about the conflict that had erupted at his establishment. "Miss Petrov, I want to apologize for what happened tonight. Mr. Ashford's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I should have intervened more forcefully. Please know that you have a position here for as long as you want it, though I hope these new opportunities will lead you to pursue your true calling." Alina smiled at him gratefully. "Thank you. You've always treated me with respect, and I appreciate that. I'll need to give proper notice, of course, and I want to make sure my shifts are covered." "Don't worry about that," he assured her. "We'll manage. What matters is that you have the chance to use your extraordinary gifts." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Music teachers offered their services free of charge, wanting to be part of her development. The director of the city's most prestigious music hall invited her to perform a recital once she was ready. Wealthy patrons pressed business cards into her hands, each wanting to support what they all agreed was a remarkable discovery. Alina accepted their kindnesses with grace, but also with a growing sense of unreality, as if she had stepped through a mirror into a parallel world where her dreams were possible again. Rebecca Chen, the music journalist, conducted an impromptu interview right there in the ballroom, asking Alina about her background, her training, and her years away from music. Alina spoke honestly about her father's illness, the financial struggles that had driven her to leave her studies, and the sacrifices her family had made. She talked about the pain of walking away from the conservatory and the music that had defined her life, and how she had tried to make peace with a different future. "But the music never really left me," Alina explained, her voice soft but steady. "I heard it in my head constantly. Sometimes at work I would be carrying trays and my fingers would be moving, playing invisible keys. I thought I had made my peace with letting that part of my life go, but I think I was really just putting it to sleep. Tonight, it woke up again." Rebecca scribbled notes furiously, her eyes bright with the excitement of a journalist who knows she's onto something significant. "This is going to be a major story," she said. "Not just the performance, though that was incredible, but everything about it, the context, the confrontation, the way you handled yourself. You've given people something to believe in, a reminder that talent and character matter more than wealth or status." As the gala wound down and guests began to depart, many stopped by to speak with Alina one more time, to shake her hand or express their admiration. Some pressed envelopes into her hands, donations to help support her as she transitioned back to musical life. By the time the last guest had left, Alina's pockets were full of business cards and her arms were tired from shaking hands. Catherine Winters had stayed until the end, and now she approached Alina with a warm smile. "My dear, I want you to come to my office tomorrow if you can. We'll discuss the grant in detail and start." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Music teachers offered their services free of charge, wanting to be part of her development. The director of the city's most prestigious music hall invited her to perform a recital once she was ready. Wealthy patrons pressed business cards into her hands, each wanting to support what they all agreed was a remarkable discovery. Alina accepted their kindnesses with grace, but also with a growing sense of unreality, as if she had stepped through a mirror into a parallel world where her dreams were possible again. Rebecca Chen, the music journalist, conducted an impromptu interview right there in the ballroom, asking Alina about her background, her training, and her years away from music. Alina spoke honestly about her father's illness, the financial struggles that had driven her to leave her studies, and the sacrifices her family had made. She talked about the pain of walking away from the conservatory and the music that had defined her life, and how she had tried to make peace with a different future. But the music never really left me, Alina explained, her voice soft but steady. I heard it in my head constantly. Sometimes at work I would be carrying trays and my fingers would be moving, playing invisible keys. I thought I had made my peace with letting that part of my life go, but I think I was really just putting it to sleep. Tonight, it woke up again. Rebecca scribbled notes furiously, her eyes bright with the excitement of a journalist who knows she's onto something significant. This is going to be a major story, she said. Not just the performance, though that was incredible, but everything about it, the context, the confrontation, the way you handled yourself. You've given people something to believe in, a reminder that talent and character matter more than wealth or status. As the gala wound down and guests began to depart, many stopped by to speak with Alina one more time, to shake her hand or express their admiration. Some pressed envelopes into her hands, donations to help support her as she transitioned back to musical life. By the time the last guest had left, Alina's pockets were full of business cards and her arms were tired from shaking hands. Catherine Winters had stayed until the end, and now she approached Alina with a warm smile. My dear, I want you to come to my office tomorrow if you can. We'll discuss the grant in detail and start making concrete plans for your future. I also want to introduce you to some people who can help guide your career development, but for tonight, you should rest. You've been through quite an ordeal. Alina nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the evening crash over her like a wave. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the performances and the confrontation was wearing off, leaving her drained but also strangely peaceful. Thank you, Mrs. Winters, for everything. I'm not sure I can properly express what your support means to me. You already have, dear, Catherine replied, patting her hand gently. You did it through your music, that's all the thanks I need. After Catherine left, Alina found herself alone in the ballroom except for the cleaning staff who were beginning to reset the space for the next day. Her fellow wait staff had already changed out of their uniforms and gone home, though several had hugged her tearfully before leaving, thrilled by her success even as they returned to their own lives of service work. Alina walked back to the piano one more time and gently ran her fingers across the keys without pressing down, feeling the familiar smoothness of the ivory. This instrument had been the catalyst for everything that had happened tonight, had been the bridge between her past and her future. She thought about her father and wished desperately that he could have been there to see it, to know that his daughter's talent had not been wasted after all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from her sister, who was 8 hours ahead in their home country. Call me when you can. Mom says she had a dream about you playing piano. She woke up crying, but she said they were happy tears. Miss you. Alina felt her own tears return as she read the message. She stepped out of the ballroom and found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby before calling home. Her mother answered after 2 rings, her voice thick with sleep and emotion. Alina, is everything all right? It's so late there. Everything's fine, Mama, Alina said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay composed. Better than fine, something amazing happened tonight. I played piano again, Mama, really played for the first time in 2 years. And people heard me, important people, and they want to help me. She heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, followed by a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. I knew it, her mother said. I felt it. I dreamed of your father tonight, Alina. He was sitting in his old chair by the window, the one he used to sit in when you practiced, and he was smiling. When I woke up, I knew something had changed for you. Tell me everything. Alina recounted the evening's events, from Marcus Ashford's cruel challenge to the standing ovations to the opportunities that had materialized like miracles. Her mother listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of amazement or anger or joy. When Alina finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Your father would be so proud, her mother finally said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just because you played beautifully, but because you stood up for yourself with dignity. You didn't let that awful man make you feel small. That takes courage, my darling. Music is important, but character is everything. I learned that from you and Papa, Alina replied. You both sacrificed so much to give me opportunities. I just hope I can make it worth it now, can build something from this second chance. You will, her mother said with absolute conviction. You have the talent and the heart. The rest will follow. But Alina, promise me something. Promise me that you'll remember why you make music. Not for the wealthy people in fancy ballrooms, not for recognition or success, but because it's part of who you are. Play for your father's memory, for the joy it brings you, for the connection it creates between people's hearts. I promise, Mama, Alina said, meaning it with everything in her. I won't forget. They talked for a few more minutes before her mother insisted that Alina needed to sleep, that she would need all her strength for the days ahead. After hanging up, Alina sat in the quiet lobby for a long time, processing everything that had happened. In the space of a few hours, her entire life had been transformed. The future that had seemed so fixed, so limited, had suddenly opened up with possibilities she had thought were lost to her forever. The hotel manager found her there and offered to have someone drive her home, concerned about her taking public transportation so late at night after such an emotional evening. Alina accepted gratefully, too tired to protest. During the quiet drive through the city's late-night streets, she watched the lights blur past the window and tried to imagine what came next. Training, practice, auditions, performances, it all seemed overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying. When the car pulled up in front of her modest apartment building, the driver helped her out and wished her good luck with genuine warmth. I was working in the hotel kitchen tonight, he explained, but I heard what happened. Everyone's talking about it. You gave us all something to be proud of, you know. Most of us who work service jobs were invisible to people like those guests. But you made them see you, really see you. That means something. Alina climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her small studio apartment, her feet aching from the evening's activities. When she unlocked her door and stepped inside, the familiar space looked different somehow, as if she were seeing it for the first time. The single room with its kitchenette in one corner and her bed pushed against the opposite wall suddenly seemed less like a permanent situation and more like a temporary way station. The poster of a grand piano that she had hung above her desk, a wistful reminder of her past life, no longer felt like a memorial to lost dreams but like a promise of things to come. She changed out of her uniform for what might be the last time, carefully hanging it up even though she was exhausted. Years of discipline and respect for her work didn't disappear just because her circumstances were changing. She set her alarm, knowing that she still had responsibilities to fulfill even as she prepared to step into her new life. Catherine Winters had invited her to the Foundation's offices, but Alina had shifts scheduled at the hotel that she would need to properly transition away from. Sleep didn't come easily despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the piano, felt the keys beneath her fingers, heard the music that had poured out of her. She replayed the evening in her mind. Marcus Ashford's sneering face, the weight of judgment from the crowd, the first notes of the Chopin Nocturne, and the way the ballroom had transformed from a place of potential humiliation into a space of triumph. She thought about his threats and his fury, and while a small part of her worried about whether he would try to make good on his promises to damage her reputation, a larger part of her felt a peaceful certainty that men like him had less power than they believed. When morning finally came, Alina rose with the sun and made herself a simple breakfast of toast and tea. She checked her phone and found dozens of messages waiting for her. Several were from numbers she didn't recognize, people she had met the previous night following up on their offers of support. There were also messages from her coworkers, expressing excitement and asking for details. But the most important message was from Friedrich Hoffmann, sent early that morning. Miss Petrov, I have been thinking about our conversation all night. I would like to accelerate your timeline if you're willing. There is a special concert in 6 weeks featuring emerging talent, and I believe you should perform. It would be an excellent platform to introduce you to the classical music community. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Alina's hand trembled slightly as she read the message. 6 weeks seemed impossibly soon, and yet the prospect thrilled her. She would need to practice intensively to rebuild her stamina and polish her technique. But the challenge felt right, felt like the kind of thing her father would have encouraged her to embrace. She called Friedrich's number and he answered on the second ring, his accented voice warm with enthusiasm. They spent 20 minutes discussing repertoire, practice schedules, and logistics. He had already arranged for her to have access to a private practice room at the conservatory, complete with a concert-grade Steinway. He also wanted her to work with a particular teacher, a renowned pianist who owed him favors and would, he assured her, be thrilled to work with someone of her caliber. After the call ended, Alina sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the speed at which her life was changing. She had woken up yesterday morning as a waitress with a secret past. She was going to sleep tonight as a pianist on the verge of a professional debut. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that it felt surreal. Her phone rang again, and this time it was Rebecca Chen, the music journalist. Alina, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to let you know that my article about last night is going to run in tomorrow's paper, and it's going to be the front page of the arts section. My editor is extremely excited about the story. I also wanted to warn you that you're probably going to get a lot of attention once it publishes. Are you prepared for that? Alina hadn't really considered the public nature of what had happened. She had been so focused on the music and the opportunities that she hadn't thought about becoming a news story, a symbol of something larger than herself. I'm not sure how to prepare for that, she admitted honestly. This all happened so fast. Just be yourself, Rebecca advised. That's what made last night so powerful, your authenticity and dignity. People are going to want to help you to be part of your story. Let them. And if you get interview requests or media attention, my suggestion is to stay focused on the music. That's what matters. They talked for a few more minutes before Alina had to end the call to get ready for her meeting with Catherine Winters. She chose her clothes carefully, wanting to look professional but not having much in her wardrobe beyond work uniforms and casual clothes. She settled on a simple dark dress that she usually wore to job interviews, pairing it with her only good shoes. The Winters Foundation occupied an elegant townhouse in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. Alina stood outside for a moment, gathering her courage before climbing the steps and ringing the bell. A young assistant answered and led her through beautifully appointed rooms filled with artwork and photographs of artists Catherine had supported over the years. Alina recognized several famous faces, among them musicians, painters, dancers who had gone on to acclaimed careers. Catherine greeted her warmly in a sunny office overlooking a small garden. She gestured for Alina to sit in a comfortable chair before settling into her own seat behind an antique desk. "I'm so glad you came," Catherine said. "I've been eager to discuss the details of how we can support you. But first, I want to make sure you understand something important. This grant isn't charity and it doesn't come with strings attached. I'm investing in your talent because I believe in it and because supporting artists is one of the great joys of my life. You don't owe me anything except to work hard and stay true to your musical vision." They spent the next hour going over the specifics. The grant would provide Alina with a monthly stipend that was more than she had been making at the hotel, enough to cover her living expenses and send money home to her family. It also included funding for lessons, practice space rental, concert attire, and other professional expenses. Catherine had already contacted the teacher Friedrich recommended, and the woman had agreed to take Alina on as a student. "There's one more thing," Catherine said, pulling out a folder. "I've arranged for you to give a small recital next month at my home. It will be intimate, just 20 or 30 people, mostly music patrons and professionals. It will give you a chance to perform in a lower-pressure environment before the concert Friedrich mentioned, and it will help introduce you to the community in a controlled way." Alina felt grateful tears prickling at her eyes again. This woman, whom she had never met before last night, was orchestrating her entire re-entry into the musical world with thoughtfulness and care. "Mrs. Winters, I don't know how to thank you. This is beyond anything I imagined possible. The best thanks you can give me is to share your gift with the world," Catherine replied. "Too many talented people never get the chances they deserve because they lack resources or connections. I'm simply removing those obstacles so your talent can shine through. The hard work, the artistry, the success or failure, that's all you. I'm just opening doors." The weeks that followed were the most intense and rewarding of Alina's life. She resigned from the hotel with proper notice, though the manager insisted she leave immediately with full pay, eager for her to focus on her music. Her days became consumed with practice, often 8 or 10 hours at the piano, rebuilding the technique and stamina that had atrophied during her time away from serious playing. Her new teacher, a fierce Russian woman named Professor Ivanova, was demanding but fair, pushing Alina to heights she hadn't known she was capable of reaching. The article Rebecca Chen wrote appeared as promised, and its impact was immediate and overwhelming. The story of the waitress who had stunned a high-society gala with her extraordinary talent captured the public imagination in ways none of them had anticipated. Local news stations picked up the story, and within days, Alina found herself doing television interviews and radio appearances. Social media exploded with discussion about class, talent, and the way society overlooks extraordinary people who work ordinary jobs. But not all the attention was positive. Marcus Ashford, true to his threats, had been making phone calls and spreading poison about Alina wherever he could. He claimed she was a fraud, that the whole evening had been staged, that she was manipulating sympathetic, wealthy people to fund a lifestyle she didn't deserve. Some people believed him, particularly those in his social circle who valued wealth and status above all else. But most people saw through his bitterness, recognizing it for what it was: the wounded pride of a man who had been proven wrong in the most public way possible. Alina tried not to pay attention to the negative commentary, focusing instead on her music and the supportive community that had formed around her. Her fellow musicians, particularly those who had also struggled with financial barriers to their careers, embraced her as one of their own. She received hundreds of messages from service workers around the world who felt seen and validated by her story, who told her that she had given them hope that their own hidden talents might someday be recognized. The recital at Catherine Winters's home was both nerve-wracking and magical. Alina played in an elegant drawing room before an audience of accomplished musicians, wealthy patrons, and music critics. She chose a program that showcased her range: a Bach prelude and fugue, a Beethoven sonata, some Debussy, and pieces by contemporary composers. The intimate setting allowed her to connect with the audience in a way that felt personal and meaningful, and when she finished, the response was enthusiastic and genuine. One of the attendees was a representative from a major recording label, and he approached Alina afterward with an offer to record an album. It was another door opening, another opportunity that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Alina accepted, though she insisted on maintaining artistic control over the repertoire, a condition the label agreed to with surprising ease. The concert at the conservatory 6 weeks after that fateful night at the hotel was the culmination of all her hard work and the support she had received. The hall was packed, with many people turned away at the door. Alina stood backstage, dressed in an elegant black gown that Catherine had helped her choose, and felt the familiar flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. This was different from the recital at Catherine's home or even her performances at the conservatory years ago. This was her professional debut, the moment that would define how the classical music world viewed her. Friedrich Hoffmann found her backstage and placed a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "You are ready for this," he said with quiet confidence. "I have seen you work these past weeks, have witnessed your dedication and growth. Trust yourself and trust the music. That is all you need to do." When Alina walked onto the stage and saw the sea of faces looking up at her expectantly, she felt a moment of pure vertigo. Then her eyes found her mother and sister, who had flown in as a surprise arranged by Catherine Winters, sitting in the front row with tears already streaming down their faces. Next to them sat her former co-workers from the hotel, dressed in their finest clothes and beaming with pride. In the back, she spotted several of the guests from that night, including Jonathan Sterling and Catherine Winters herself. And there, in the very last row, sitting alone and looking distinctly uncomfortable, was Marcus Ashford. Alina was surprised to see him there, couldn't imagine what had driven him to attend. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, a hope that she would fail publicly and vindicate his prejudices. Or perhaps it was something more complicated, a need to witness the consequences of his cruelty and see what had grown from the seeds he had tried to destroy. Alina sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. She had chosen to open with the same Chopin nocturne she had played at the hotel, a deliberate callback to the moment that had changed everything. But this performance was different, deeper, informed by everything that had happened since. The notes flowed from her fingers with a maturity and confidence that hadn't been there before, shaped by struggle and triumph in equal measure. The audience was transfixed from the first note. Alina moved through her program with assurance and artistry, each piece building on the last to create a narrative of transformation and redemption. She played Rachmaninoff again, but this time it was the gentler, more introspective third piano concerto's second movement, arranged for solo piano. She played Chopin's revolutionary etude with fierce passion, letting the music speak to the upheaval her life had undergone. And she closed with a contemporary piece by a young composer she had met through Catherine's network, a work that spoke to themes of immigration, sacrifice, and hope. When the final notes faded and Alina lifted her hands from the keys, the silence that followed felt sacred. Then the audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. People leaped to their feet in a standing ovation that went on for several minutes, with calls of brava echoing through the space. Alina stood and bowed, her eyes scanning the crowd and drinking in their appreciation. She looked to the back row and saw that Marcus Ashford was standing as well, though he wasn't applauding. He was simply standing there, his face a mixture of emotions too complex to name. As their eyes met across the distance of the concert hall, Alina saw something she hadn't expected to see. Not hatred or contempt, but a kind of unwilling recognition. He was being forced to confront the reality that he had been wrong, that his entire worldview was built on false assumptions, and the cognitive dissonance was written clearly across his features. Alina didn't feel triumph at his discomfort, nor did she feel the desire for revenge or vindication. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. Marcus Ashford had so much materially but seemed to have so little that actually mattered. No capacity for growth, no willingness to admit error, no connection to the things that made life meaningful. His wealth had insulated him from consequences but also from authentic human experiences, and in that moment, Alina understood that she was far richer than he would ever be. After the concert, there was a reception where well-wishers surrounded Alina, offering congratulations and opportunities. Recording contracts, performance bookings, teaching positions at prestigious institutions, the offers came so fast that Alina's head spun. Catherine and Friedrich helped her navigate the attention, steering her toward the most appropriate opportunities while protecting her from those who might try to exploit her sudden fame. Alina's mother embraced her tightly, whispering in their native language, "Your father is watching from heaven, my darling, and his heart is full. You honored his memory tonight and you honored your own gifts. Never forget this moment. Never forget that you earned this through talent and hard work and character." As the evening wound down and the crowds finally dispersed, Alina found herself standing alone in the now-empty concert hall, looking at the piano that had been her instrument of transformation. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the loss of her father and her dreams to the grinding anonymity of service work to this moment of recognition and new beginning. None of it had been easy, and she knew that challenges still lay ahead. The music world could be just as cruel and competitive as any other field, and her success would depend on sustained effort and continued growth. But she also knew something now that she hadn't known before that night at the hotel. Her worth wasn't determined by other people's recognition or approval. The music lived in her regardless of whether anyone heard it, and her dignity couldn't be taken away by people like Marcus Ashford, no matter how wealthy or powerful they believed themselves to be. She had proven to herself that resilience and talent could overcome circumstances, that sacrifice didn't have to mean the permanent death of dreams, and that sometimes the universe conspired to create moments of grace when they were most needed. Alina walked out of the concert hall into the cool night air, her mother and sister flanking her on either side. The city lights sparkled around them, full of possibility and promise. Tomorrow she would begin working on her recording, would start preparing for the next performance, would continue building the career that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. But tonight, she would simply be grateful. For the music that had saved her, for the people who had believed in her, and for the courage she had found within herself when she needed it most. Behind her, unnoticed, Marcus Ashford stood in the shadows outside the concert hall, having waited until everyone else had left. He watched Alina laugh with her family, saw the joy and peace on her face, and felt the full weight of his own emptiness. He had tried to diminish her and had instead diminished himself. He had sought to prove his superiority and had instead proven his smallness. And as he turned to walk alone to his expensive car, parked among the more modest vehicles of the music lovers who had filled the hall, he understood that some lessons come too late to change anything but are learned nonetheless. The story of the waitress who played piano would be told and retold in the years to come, becoming a modern parable about talent, class, and the danger of underestimating people based on their circumstances. Alina Petrov would go on to have a distinguished career, performing on the world's greatest stages and inspiring countless others who struggled against barriers not of their own making. But the heart of the story would always remain that single night at the Grand Sterling Hotel, when a woman refused to be humiliated, played with everything she had, and reminded everyone watching that human worth cannot be measured by job titles or bank accounts, but only by the courage to be authentic and the grace to share one's gifts with the world. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.